All right, folks, time to get started. Thanks for coming to this session, Watts ReImagined. We're going to hear about neighborhood revitalization with the influx or insertion of sustainability as a bit of a guiding framework. We're going to talk about Watts as a specific place that has a long and interesting history, and also use it as a bit of an example for how to look at any neighborhood using a sustainability lens. I'm going to wait a little bit for a few more folks to get here, and I'm going to do that by seeing if who out here would like to tell us why you chose this particular session and what you might hope to get out of it. So I need some volunteers, or else I'll pick on my friends. So who wants to share why they got here? Would you like to?
Sure.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm good. Oh, it may not be on.
I chose this session because I'm a Los Angeles native, so it's close to my heart, and also just wanted to learn more about neighborhood development in low-income communities.
Okay, great. Thank you. Who's next? So this is about community and sharing lessons learned, so we all have to get to be friends very quickly so we can get the most out of this session. Other volunteers?
I think Rebecca.
Thank you, Rebecca.
To be very honest, this was one of the few lead ND offerings, which there need to be more of. And then I saw that you and Jessica were on the platform, so I said, oh my God, I get to see you guys. And then, of course, near and dear to my heart, of course, our
Yes.
green neighborhoods and sustainable communities. So multiple reasons to be here.
Great, all right. Thank you, Rebecca Flora, former USGBC board member, green building person extraordinaire. All right, let's hear from at least one more person. Yes.
Hi,
Tell us your name and where you're from.
I'm Lisa Feibelman, and I live in Vienna, Virginia, very nearby, and I work in the city of Fairfax, and I'm a planner, so I'm not an architect or someone that has product interest. I have neighborhood interest, and always wanted to do the neighborhood development, but did not. So I have a lean Creed associate, and this is one that I'm interested in.
Great, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thanks to all of you volunteers. Now we'll introduce ourselves. I'm Walker Wells. I'm with Global Green, and I'm ostensibly the moderator of this session, as well as one of the speakers. Also with us is Chris Jordan with Grant Housing, Jessica Millman with NRDC, and Krista Frank, who works with me at Global Green. And you'll hear more about the stuff that we do as we get into the presentation. So with that, Chris, let's get started.
I think you do some good intro slides. You do like
Oh, I have
learning
these, and I don't
objectives.
need this mic because I got a mic here.
He does the learning objectives.
Yes, I have some slides that we need to touch on because there's rules about these things. So this is what we're talking about. The effort to combine community revitalization and some of the tools that have been used in the past, different sources of funding, low-income housing tax credits, infrastructure funding, transit funding, neighborhood initiative, with this idea of sustainability and the three-legged stool, and seeing if sort of the sustainability lens can kind of reposition how we look at communities, and if it gives us sort of a new direction in this effort to pursue revitalization. And arguably a way to kind of say, okay, this is how things have been in the past. Maybe sustainability enables you to look forward in a slightly better or different fashion. These are our learning objectives. There is a theme in here about different nonprofits working together, because I think we're all nonprofit people, Global Green, NRDC, Grant Housing, this collaboration moment. We're trying to share what sort of has happened to date with Watts ReImagined and talk about how it could be transferred or replicated in other places. We'll talk about LEAD ND and using LEAD for neighborhood development as a tool for assessing and coming up with suggestions for an existing neighborhood, just slightly different than the main purpose for which LEAD ND was developed, which was more a planning and design and construction tool for new communities. So this is applying those prerequisites and credits to existing places. Talk a little bit about how LEAD ND addresses these issues of equity, economic opportunity, and resiliency, which is not so much, but we recognize that as an opportunity to sort of expand the breadth of what LEAD ND addresses. And then I was just at a session about LEAD for neighborhood development, and they're talking about integrating the new pilot credits for social equity and the new pilot credits for resilience. So they're getting this too, partly because in another area of our work, we bring some of the lead ND folks along for the ride with us as we look at existing neighborhoods. So I think we've been effective at sort of infiltrating their thinking about existing communities. All right, next slide. So here we go, on to Chris.
So good afternoon. How do you develop one of the most economically depressed areas in the country? How do you do it? Well, I can tell you, you need an A-team. You need a team, a family of people and organizations who will come together with a singular desire to then build up a great community. So what we've done is to put together this A-team. I am from Grant Housing and Economic Development Corp. It is a nonprofit organization that is connected to the Grant AME Church in Los Angeles, specifically in Watts. And in next year, 2016, we celebrate 110 years in the Watts area providing social services to the community. In addition to Grant Housing, we work along with the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC, and their Urban Solutions program. And along with NRDC, we have other great components and organizations, Creative Housing, Estelano Lazar Perez Advisors, Cancui Design, S. Groner, and also Global Green, and a couple of others. NRDC is an international environmental and public policy organization, and the Urban Solutions program focuses on building healthy and sustainable communities. What you see here is what Watts is really known for. This is the icon that is located in Watts. It's the Watts Towers. And in the 20s, Simon Rodia began to build it. It took him about 33 years to complete this. He used only a few tools, and this was built by hand. And this is really an icon. This is really the symbol of Watts. Let me tell you some numbers about Watts. The population is right around close to 50,000. The ethnicity is 64% Latino, 29% African American. There's a low level of college education persons there, so 2.9% actually have college degrees. The median household income is $25,000, and the median age is about 21, so it's a young community. What you see on the left is a picture of 103rd Street, which is the downtown area of Watts. You'll see many people there, the hustle and bustle, the drive of a downtown area, businesses, commerce, places for people to congregate. And then you see a train station on the right side. So it's a TOD site, 1960. But on the right side, you see the picture there with the same train station. However, what's missing are the businesses, the hustle and bustle of commerce. It's all missing. In the 65 uprising, this area was called Charcoal Alley because all of the businesses were burned out. And what happened was they never returned. And so now you have what is a transient job kind of situation in which all the people, most of the people in Watts actually travel outside of the area to work, to live, to shop, all the amenities that most of the areas around the country, they don't have. We don't have. Watts has the lowest quality of life in any Southern California community. So this matrix here, this index, says that Watts is 1.91 versus a Newport Beach where Kobe Bryant lives, that's 8.88. These are pictures of the existing conditions in Watts. And on the left, you see what is an open space, a blighted space. It's been open for over 20 years. And we'll talk some more about that one. And on the right, you'll see at this opening of what used to be the downtown area of Watts, a small kind of convenience store and some other uses. So there are buildings, there are commerce, but it's virtually underserved, underutilized. So you see small buildings like this. Well, Watts ReImagined came together almost 3 years ago. Those organizations and persons I talked about early, we came together with a vision. And our vision is a diverse and thriving community that honors culture, we honor people, values prosperity, and preserves our natural resources. The Watts community. We believe that we don't work alone, that a lot of times when we bring consultants together, what is lost is the input of the community. And so we maintain a great level of community input and engagement from the Watts community. What makes us different? Well, Watts has been studied many, many times. The city has done studies, the state has done studies, the federal government has done studies about Watts and what can actually happen there. Where our work, we've taken those studies and we've looked at a lot of them and picked out the things that are actually able to be executed. What can we actually do out of the things that have been studied? So that makes us different. We're not trying to recreate the wheel. We're trying to take what's good out of the wheel and actually do it. Jessica.
Thanks, Chris. What is really fundamental to our work is our respect for and honoring of Watts' past and its present. And what this means is that we aren't just applying experiences and best practices from other places, like let's just say Newark, New Jersey, and dropping them upon Watts. No, in fact, we bring them to a broad table of stakeholders where we can work together to tailor fit those solutions to the Watts context. As Chris said, what really sets us apart is that we are not creating anything new. And as a planner, that's like a little bit disconcerting from the beginning. But we realized fairly early on that Watts was the lucky recipient of a lot of study, fabulous plans and resources that were out there. But none of them contained a comprehensive vision that spoke to the community about what the future of that community might look like. So you have, for example, Watts Green Streets that talked a lot about green infrastructure and green streets, but it didn't go beyond green infrastructure. Watts Watershed dealt with water issues, but again, there was no single document that we found that had that future for Watts. Being that I'm sort of a huge fan of Lead for Neighborhood Development, and that is like the largest understatement, I see my world and my work in particular through the lens of Lead for Neighborhood Development. And so when we were faced with looking at these plans, we decided that maybe we would use Lead ND in an unconventional way. We'd actually use it as a tool to audit all of these different plans. And that audit tool, that sustainability scan, would allow us to identify the strengths and the weaknesses in the community. An example of one of the gaps that we found is resiliency. Walker mentioned that actually resiliency as an indicator is missing in Lead for Neighborhood Development because we were applying Lead ND in this way, in a non-traditional way. We actually had added in some resiliency and equity metrics that we got from the NAACP, so we had some freedom anyway. We found that resiliency was missing, but there were lots of wonderful strengths that were quite consistent with the principles and sustainability metrics in Lead for Neighborhood Development. And those strengths are reflected here in this list of community priorities. It's just a few of the priorities that we noted. But these are, again, really the strengths. And these community priorities became housed in a document that we're calling an action agenda for a sustainable Watts. Safety is one of those things. Of course, it was present in all the plans and something that we needed to make sure that we recognized. And it wasn't just sort of the traditional view from a crime standpoint, but safety from a pedestrian standpoint as well. So better lighting, which honestly has a connection to crime anyway, and that part of safety, but certainly safety as a pedestrian was really important. Better crosswalks. Los Angeles, there's a native Los Angelinos here, or Angelinos, whatever, here. You know that it's characterized by very long blocks and very wide arterial streets. And so crosswalks, making sure that those crosswalks are well marked and are mid-block, those are very important things, because one of the critical pieces that the community recognized as a priority is really access to opportunities. So access is the key word here. So access to jobs, access to quality housing, and access to mixed uses. Mixed use is such a huge part of Lead for Neighborhood Development, and it was a huge thing, huge strength in all of the other plans that we had audited. But we wanted to marry that desire for mixed use with the desire of the community to have job training opportunities. And so things like Culinary Institute, Technology Training Institute, things like that are present in our action agenda. And as you may know, California is in a drought, and Los Angeles, being in California, also in a drought. And so every time there is some investment in infrastructure in this neighborhood, we believe that there should be an investment in green infrastructure. So right now they're doing a lot of work along 103rd Street, which I'll show you an image of in a second. We want to make sure that the work that's being done can incorporate as much green in it as possible. So this is 103rd Street, the heart of Watts. And one of the things that we were talking, or how we're characterizing this now, is that this is Watts's main street. It's bookended by a couple of interesting, wonderful amenities. The train station that Chris mentioned is on one end, and then Park Gateway is on the other end. So that's on the left hand of your screen. That was the vacant parcel that Chris mentioned. I'll talk about it again later. And then Chris, again later, will also mention it. So 103rd Street, Main Street, Watts, is the place where we'd like to see the implementation of our action agenda. Chris mentioned the 1965 uprising. It's very important that it was very important to us that we commemorate that 50th anniversary, which was on August 11th of this year. We wanted to honor it because it was an extremely important event, but we also recognized it as a huge opportunity. Based on the experiences of the 40th anniversary, we knew that there was going to be added media attention. Our objective, our idea, was to harness that media attention and try to shine a light on all of these things that we wanted to do in Watts. One piece that I thought was very important of our commemoration activities was a storytelling event that occurred on the eve of the anniversary. I was not there, but Chris was. Chris, would you mind just sharing a little bit about that storytelling event?
Sure. One of the added benefits of the way that we've been approaching this is we've been building trust in our community, that we have events that bring the community together. And some feel good and some more substantive, like this one. And this particular one, even in its planning, I had no idea it would turn out like it did. We invited the community to come and tell their story about or share their story about those who were actually involved or present during the '65 uprising. And we had many people who shared. Lots of people showed up, and they all had stories. One in particular was this young man was 12 at the time, and he was at the flashpoint of the particular uprising, and he was an eyewitness to what happened with the police officer and two gentlemen who were arrested that particular day. But the people were engaged. We played music from the time, and the event was held at a church. However, when the music was played, it turned into a party inside the church. So it was very inspiring that even the music was a symbol of a connection between the time in '65 and now. And so several stories were told. We were able to hear about the first African-American Rhodes Scholar who was a part of this event at that time. So it was a great time.
Yeah. The other event that we held to commemorate the anniversary is what we were calling tactical urbanism. Who's heard of that term, tactical urbanism? Okay, not that many, all right. So it's like, if you've heard of pop-up spaces, what it is basically small, temporary interventions that may be used as a means to test an idea. And so in this case, we had a vacant parcel that we showed you, the Park Gateway site. And we decided that it would be a great opportunity to show the community and demonstrate to the community what could happen if that space was alive again, was active again. And so through a series of community workshops, we created a program for what that space would look like. So on Sunday, August 16th, people arrived on this vacant site, which was basically transformed. It's transformed into a stage, a performance stage. There were different stations. The station here in the picture was manned by Krista and Walker.
And Tim.
Oh, and Tim. But, well, I'm going to get to Tim. Tim has a special role, too. But, and this was the ReImagine station, or, ReImagining station. And so the community was able to silkscreen shirts there. Tim's very special station was a play station for children. Tim created a climbing wall. Tim works for Global Green as well. So there was a climbing wall there for kids to climb on, and a sandbox. There was a food and gardens booth, and there were food demonstrations. There was a Our History, Our Story booth, and this was told through the eyes and stories of just regular citizens in Watts. And then there was a Watts Hall of Fame, where we honored those important folks who lived and call Watts home. But you don't have to take my word for how awesome this event was. We have a video clip, so we're going to play that now.
On the final days of the 50th anniversary of the Watts 1965 rebellion, the Watts ReImagined team, which includes Grant Housing and Economic Development Corporation, the Natural Resource Defense Council Urban Solutions Program, and Kukui Design Initiative, activated a lot on 103rd Street and Central Avenue. The vacant lot has sat abandoned for decades. It is evident of the lack of investment and attention paid to Watts before and after the 1965 riots. The event brought in residents from all over Watts, and the event consisted of food, live music, performances, and activities like Zumba, a healthy food cooking demonstration, and a collaborative song-making activity. The Watts ReImagined team hopes to make the activated lot a long-term endeavor, with future programming activities and potentially a mixed-use site with retail space and affordable housing. The activation of the lot was a one-time event, but the Watts ReImagined team hopes to continue the momentum and continue to bring resources and attention to Watts to create long-lasting, sustainable change in the community.
So this, you just saw her name, Ashley, put this video together for us, and Ashley found us, really, though we did locate her at one of the community workshops we had, and she became one of our strongest and best volunteers, so she was a huge asset. So shout out to Ashley.
Okay. Right, well, thanks, Chris. Jessica, so we heard quite a bit about Watts and some of the work that's happened there to date. Another term I've heard, in addition to tactical urbanism, literally in the last 3 months, is creative placemaking. And to use this act of making a place from a vacant lot as a way to engage a community in an authentic way, but also in a way where the community gets something immediately in the exchange, as compared to how us planners will often do outreach, where we'll invite the community to come to some community center, and the experts stand up there and write stuff up on easels, and maybe they get some water and some chocolate chip cookies, and it's mostly sort of extractive on the part of the planners, and the community doesn't get so much in exchange. So I think there's an emerging discourse and field of practice to say, let's do an event where people can have fun and we can learn about what's on their minds and on their needs. So I think we ended up doing that without necessarily knowing what it was called at the time. So even since we did this, I've learned new stuff. What I want to do is to contextualize some of the work that we've done, been involved in, Krista and Tim and I, with Global Green in the Watts-related work. And I'm going to put this into the context of neighborhood planning, neighborhood revitalization, how we think about neighborhoods as a place to engage with communities and engage with sustainability, and how LEAD ND can factor into that. And Krista will show a few examples of how we've done that in some other neighborhoods in Los Angeles, and then Chris is going to bring it home and tell us what's happening next with Watts. So there's this idea of a neighborhood that's been floating around for quite a while, and Jessica and I were talking yesterday, and she said, you should look up this idea of the neighborhood unit and when it kind of got started and who was talking about it. And it is really like a 100-year-old idea about recognizing that people identify with neighborhoods, but neighborhoods are also an effective scale to plan at. And some of the literature will break it down like this, that a neighborhood has a spatial quality, a physical form. It'll be bounded by streets or hills or rivers, and it'll maybe have a commercial strip, sort of the thing you can draw on a map. But then there's also this functional quality of how a neighborhood operates, the social networks that exist there, that is much more organic, that isn't hard-lined. But the trick is to kind of engage with both of those simultaneously as you try and tease out what to do that can add value based on a whole bunch of work that's happened in the past. So a couple of famous diagrams that have emerged over the years are these two. And so the one on the left, Clarence Perry, this was published in 1929 as part of New York Regional Plan efforts. And this was developed as a diagram for a neighborhood that talked about the value of having a school in the center of the community or a community center in the center of the community, having arterial streets around the edges, 10% park space, blocks designed for pedestrians. Turns out the reason this was developed was because all these cars had been introduced into cities, and I read that there was one childhood death a day from vehicles in New York City around the time this was being cooked up. So we need to create these little villages that are protected from that automobile. And then this neighborhood planning unit kind of became something perpetuated by sort of urban planners for the next 60, 70 years, up to the point where it got kind of reimagined by Congress for New Urbanism, and then sort of reimagined by Doug Farr in his book Sustainable Urbanism. And so you'll see some things in this one over here that are a little bit different. So we still have civic uses in the center, but you can see the size of these blocks are much more fine-grained than what was in this original diagram. So recognizing what we've learned about small block size and walkability and how valuable that is. We see not just 10% open space, but we see a habitat corridor, so green infrastructure that's also poking in this way. There's also a transit corridor. So it's not just where do we put the cars, but recognizing that you want the neighborhood to be walkable, connected to transit, to be connected to nature. And you start to get a sense, a normative sense of what you want in a neighborhood. And this, combined with some other tools like Lead for Neighborhood Development, enables us to go to Watts or other neighborhoods and say, what's here, what's good, what can we build on, where are the problems, long blocks, no green infrastructure, how do we add those things to a particular place? So that's the kind of spatial part. But then there's definitely this sort of mental mapping, the social element, how people actually engage with their neighborhoods. And this is just some kid's drawing I took off of the internet, but we actually did this exercise at Global Green at our retreat, and I did it at a class I teach out in Claremont, and had people draw their neighborhoods. And I, of course, being a planner, thought they'd draw the grid of streets and their house. And of course, people drew like a building that said school, and then like a dotted line, grandma's house, and then they would draw like angry dog, or like scary dark place, or friend's house, or the place we went to that we didn't tell our parents about. And so if you think right now about an important neighborhood to you, you realize it's all this stuff at once. Like it's space, it's relationships, it's experiences. And that's the challenge, is to go to any place and try and like engage with all that stuff in an authentic way. And that's what we're still trying to do and learning how to do. So what we do have is a pretty good list at this point of the things you would like to see in a sustainable neighborhood. You would like it to have these physical attributes: schools, efficient buildings, access to jobs, parks, transit. We also know that there's a need to address equity, displacement, gentrification. We are seeing these emerging things about resilience, adaptation, and then one of my favorite areas is biophilia, trying to bring nature into the city. And I think in some of these post-industrial cities where people are doing work, Detroit being the poster child, all this vacant land gives us the opportunity to create like authentic, functioning nature ecosystems right next to urban neighborhoods. And I think that's an urban form that hasn't existed before. So there's an incredibly exciting planning opportunity that's emerging out of those places. We've talked about LEAD-ND a little bit. I'm just going to describe quickly how we've modified it to be an assessment tool for existing neighborhoods. So here's all that we did, is we kept all of the prerequisites and credits. So this is all stuff that people who know LEAD-ND will be familiar with. But then we added some things going this way. And a lot of this work was actually done with myself and then Ted Bardicke, who used to work at Global Green, and many of you know. So we said, it's not just yes or no if you're in an existing place. We can ask, is it in the baseline condition? Is it just there? Is there anybody who says it's a local or regional planning priority, like interconnected bicycle ways or green infrastructure, affordable housing? Is it in the code? Is it technically feasible? Like, can you fit a bike lane on that street? It's a good idea, but is there actual room? Will anybody pay for it? And does the neighborhood want it in the first place? Because we don't want to show up with our goodie bag of sustainability and sprinkle it around like Johnny Appleseed, and the neighborhood say like, thanks, but like we never really asked for that bike lane or that green infrastructure. We'd like to be able to get to our light rail station in a safe way. So this is kind of our framework for engaging in these places, and Krista will give you a few examples of how we've done this.
Thanks for pardoning my cold. I want to talk about the Youth Policy Institute, or YPI, which is one of a few local nonprofits that Global Green has worked with at a neighborhood scale. YPI focuses on reducing poverty through access to high-quality education and various other services such as job training. They were the recipient of a HUD Choice Neighborhood Planning Grant to support the development of a neighborhood regional revitalization plan. And they are based in Hollywood, which has been designated as a federal promise zone. And what you see on this map is the intersection of the Choice Planning Grant in blue and the Promise Zone designation in red. And YPI was able to partner with McCormick Baron Salazar, who's a developer that specializes in affordable housing, Tortigalas, an urban design firm in Los Angeles, and Global Green, who is tapped to inject sustainable measures into the conversation through assessments and consultation, and to insert opportunities for improvement into that neighborhood revitalization plan. On the ground, sustainability and the jargon associated with it can be difficult for city staff, community organizations, and neighborhood residents to wrap their heads around. Global Green was invited to participate in a neighborhood charrette where we were able to elicit some feedback from Hollywood residents about their neighborhood and what it's like to live there. We asked, you can see one of our tables, we asked questions such as, do you know your neighborhood? Can you walk to a park? Can you access fresh food? Do you have access to healthcare? And do you have access to education and job training? And using these questions versus just standards, we can provoke unique insights rather than just prescribing measures. These questions are all synthesized from the LEAD ND sustainability measures, such as connectivity, diverse uses within walking distance, access to civic and public space, and a jobs-housing balance. But they're reformulated to provoke residents to think about how they function within their neighborhood. In essence, we've found that a combination of the technical proficiency and expertise that we bring, plus listening, allows us to better elicit what the local context is. And this is a map of some of the neighborhoods that we've worked in within Los Angeles. Global Green has also partnered with neighborhood organizations in Watts, Hollywood, the Crenshaw Corridor, Little Tokyo, and Boyle Heights. When we first initiate partnerships, the neighborhood organizations often want to learn more about what other neighborhoods around the city are up to and how they've been integrating sustainability into their planning. For example, in the Crenshaw Corridor, Global Green was able to connect the West Angeles CDC with the folks at the Little Tokyo Service Center to explore what work they've done so far while participating in the Eco Districts Protocol, if you're familiar with that. When opportunities for intervention are identified at a parcel and infrastructure level, new stakeholders and partners, such as private entities, various city departments, transit authorities, and advocate organizations are often brought into the same room to discuss opportunities together, and then after that, they often form lasting relationships. Integrating sustainable best practices into urban revitalization not only connects individual neighborhoods, but aligns them using a holistic approach to city-scale work and creates capacity for them to leverage assistance from national entities.
I can just add one final point on what we're trying to show with these slides is just this strategy in Los Angeles of working with each neighborhood and its sort of unique interests and opportunities, but with the longer-term goal of both sort of the impact or benefit of that spreading, which is why the sort of the circles are starting to radiate, but also a clear approach of over time connecting these different groups so we can share best practices, lesson learned, and hopefully we can build a bit of a community of neighborhood sustainability in Los Angeles that I think could be unique nationally and hopefully provide some lessons learned and potentially be a national model for other places that don't want to have just one sustainable neighborhood or one eco district, but like a whole cohort of them. All right, back to Chris.
So I get to show you and talk to you about what we're going to do. We have a quote here from Chef Roy Choi. Now, Roy Choi is going to be having or developing a new restaurant in the area of that 103rd area that we talked about. But what he says is, why Watts? And then he answers that question with, you have to start with the most powerful community first. And that comes from knowing what the history is about Watts and the resiliency of the people of Watts, that this is really one of the strongest communities that we have. And so I'm excited about what I'm about to show you and what we're about to do. So that blighted corner that we talked about, 103rd and Central, is actually going to be the gateway into the new Watts Main Street. And so you see here, this is the opening to that gateway. Yes. So right here you see there is a bank that's going to be a part of this development. A new banking center, state-of-the-art with all the new technologies that the bank has to offer. It's going to be at the corner. Next to that, that's this section here, and on top, we're going to have a culinary arts academy in which members or people of the community or surrounding neighborhoods can learn to prepare food. And on this side, let me back up. Here, we're going to have an IT college, which youths and other persons from the community will learn how to build mainframes and to do coding and to do other IT things. And here, we're going to develop the first sit-down family restaurant in 50 years in the area of Watts. So now families don't have a place to have dinner inside Watts. They have to travel outside. So this is going to be the first sit-down restaurant in Watts in about 50 years. There's several elements about this. We have also family housing on what is the south end of this development. But what is particularly interesting, and you'll see a piece of it here, but it continues the entire footprint of the housing, is an urban garden that's going to be on top of the building. So we will grow fresh fruits and vegetables. Now we have a small farmer's market that happens once a month. But with this new development, we'll be able to do many other farmers markets in this courtyard. We're planning between the buildings here. Right inside there, we're planning to have weekly farmers markets where the residents will have access to fresh fruits and vegetables. And a part of the programmatic items about this project is that we are actually going to have a program that helps us combat recidivism. And there will be a small set aside of these units that will be set aside for a program, and we're partnering with the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. And those who are coming out of prison that are non-threatening, with non-threatening felonies, etc., will be able to come and have community within this particular project, and they will get training and then be able to get job placement once they finish the program. And so we have several things that are planned for this Park Gateway site, but it's exciting that the entire community has been able to give input and still continues to give input about this project.
Oh my goodness. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Walker.
I was trying to be discreet.
What you see here is the green infrastructure and green amenities that we are planning for that 103rd Street downtown, the main street. We have a network, family of organizations and people who have come together to help us do this. The mayor has been very supportive of this. Our council offices have been very supportive. This particular area borders two council offices. It borders 2 assembly offices. It borders our senators' offices. So we have, instead of having 1 meeting, we have 6 meetings to make sure that all of our electeds are on board. But they've been very supportive. Down the street from us, an organization called the Children's Institute, Kaiser Permanente has been a part of our discussions. We have what is the Watts Gang Task Force that has been essential in terms of our police and resident relations, and that is going very well. Watts Neighborhood Council, Watts Century Latino, who is co-chairing with Grant Housing, Watts Labor Community Action Committee, who has been on the scenes providing jobs since 1964, the Watts Village Theater Company, who is going to be instrumental in putting on plays and other theatrical events right at our center at the Gateway. So,
That's it.
Back to Walker.
Okay, thank you to all the speakers. And we are exactly on time for some questions and dialogue and discussion. So we do want to hear from you. I have one question I'm going to start it off with, and it is on this topic of trust. So Chris, you talked about building trust in the community over time. We talked about creative placemaking as a way to engage the community in an authentic way. But I thought I'd start with you, Jessica, just because you've worked in some other places, like NRDC, Urban Solutions has been in Watts, and been in, I think, Codman Square in Boston, and I think up in outside of Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, Indianapolis. I may be getting these things wrong. Syracuse. So yeah, so far so good.
So
okay,
far, so
good. I'm keeping track. So, I mean, we know a lot of stuff by now about sustainability and these metrics and standards and building height to street width and housing diversity index. But how, as sort of technical assistance providers, practitioners, to what degree do you think like our work is able to be part of that trust equation, which seems to take time to build and need sort of a number of positive interactions? So
Yeah.
it's a long-winded question. But.
Yeah, it's sort of easy to answer in that we don't work in communities where we aren't invited. This work on Watts ReImagined started with Chris reaching out to colleagues of ours in another program at NRDC and asking for some of the services that we've been able to provide, and we were brought in. And I think that's really critical and fundamental. And in all of the communities that we've worked in, and those that Walker mentioned and in others, we are there because they're seeking assistance. The other thing that's really critical is, and I'm not great at this as personally, but patience. And I'll use an example of Little Tokyo, another Los Angeles community that we worked in. It was a community where we felt like we could hit the ground running and move very quickly in developing a plan for some vacant parcels there. I was like, we'll be in and out in 6 months. It took us 6 months to really just to gain that trust in order to even be introduced to other key stakeholders in the community by the Little Tokyo Community or Service Center. So it's fundamental. You're not going to get anywhere unless you take time, take some deep breaths, and move on the community's pace, and not at any sort of thought in your own head about how quickly things should move along.
Yeah. Chris, you want to add anything? Also just building trust with other people in the community.
Sure. As I said before, Watts has been studied over and over. And through those studies, although it's been studied a lot, very little has been executed, very little has been built. And so there's a distrust of the people for developers, for the city to come in and say we're going to do this or that. And so in order to gain trust, what we've done is to have several community meetings, but the goal is to do small things that garner trust. So with the urban pop-up, we went to the park to have an open meeting, and whoever was there came and participated and told us what they think should be at the site on a temporary basis. And that's how we got the ideas for what we actually built on the site for the pop-up. So the community saw, or the community experienced a meeting which they gave input, and then they were actually able to see their input implemented at the site. And so with that, those are ways that you can garner trust in the community.
If I can add on to that,
Yep, I'm going to get ready to go.
One really important point is it's just that with these pop-ups, tactical urbanism, creative space making, place making, whatever you want to call it, it can be an ideal opportunity to get that feedback, engage your community, get feedback, and show them almost immediately the intention to actually implement their findings and their recommendations. In planning, I'm sure many of you experience, it takes so long, and even in just real estate development, it takes such a long time. Take advantage of these pop-up opportunities to get that immediate feedback.
Sure. Okay, on to you guys. Yes, you were first with your hand up, so here you go.
Hi, Naomi Davis from Blacks and Green in Chicago. I have a question about the bank. The bank that you selected, how did it earn that opportunity? What ways is or was or shall they be participating in the life of the community? That's one question.
Good question. The bank actually owned part of the site that we're developing. So it wasn't a new entity coming in. It was one that has been in the community for quite some time. So the other owners were Grant Housing. So there were two owners for the site. And so it's just a negotiation about where we can actually move their existing operation and give them a better spot, and then do quite a large development.
Okay.
Are they lending to homeowners in the neighborhood? What's their CRA rate?
Their record is challenged like most banks. We are convincing them that neighborhood banking is something that they should be doing at a greater level. So that's part of our discussion too, not only to be a part of a development that will, bring them a picture on the Wall Street Journal, but actually helping people in the community and doing more community banking.
Okay, and I like more faster questions and quick answers, so you're on.
No pressure.
Good
Thank
question.
you. Hi. So my question is, have people like in Public Works and the DOT and all the folks that regulate the land and the transportation been a part of this discussion? Because if it's great to have a plan and you have a gateway, but to be able to get people to approve the plan and to allow the transportation to go through, that can be a very sticky thing. And I just wondered how the people that regulate and review things were involved in this process, or have they been?
Okay.
Sure. The project itself is a by right project, so we didn't have to have that much engagement with that particular piece. However, we have engaged the county, who is responsible for a portion of the infrastructure. We have engaged the city, and what we brought to the table are resources that actually map out what can happen. So we're a value add to them. We've done a bunch of the infrastructure work. We've done a bunch of the planning that they don't have to include in their budget. So yes, so we're saying here's something baked. If you'll just sign off on it, we can move forward, and they love it.
Okay. And he's ahead of you. Yep. Okay.
Yes, I just have a general question. I'm interested in the interaction, I guess, between the gang activity and what you're doing, and how, I guess, how that affects you, and where that would be maybe on the list of barriers.
Yes.
Or are you seeing less happening on that side, or concrete steps? Or can you just talk about the gang interaction?
Yeah, great question. Grant Housing, it was in the, you could see our former project in the video. There's a 92 unit affordable housing project. It was a 9% tax credit deal. And we finished that in 2009. And some things we learned specifically about gang activity and how to deal with that. It helps that we are a faith-based organization. It helps that we are connected to a church. And so our project is inherently known as a church project, which is sort of hands-off for gangs. But what we did was we actually hired locals. And so part of the local hiring was included Crips and Bloods, which are rivals in the area. And what we learned from that was an economic opportunity can trump these gang activities, as well as turf wars, things like that, because they worked in the hole together, pouring cement, rebar finishing, those kinds of things that they could do, a lower skilled labor. They worked together and were fine and had, no issues. We saw a diminishing of theft on the site. We also enjoy now that there's no tagging of the buildings. And so it's really been a community project that has taken on ownership by the community. So there are several benefits that we've learned through hiring just local persons, and that included gang members.
Hi, my question is mainly about, so you have a very diverse community. Did you have any language barriers to kind of keeping the community engaged?
Just me.
I can answer.
Or Jessica, go ahead.
You're the one with the
there's
barrier.
an
Right.
interesting, several interesting things came up with Watts. Was that, this 1965 narrative is mostly an African American neighborhood when it was really more of an ethnic enclave. But the Watts of, 2015 is nearly 50% Latino. And so, and then there was this discussion of sort of much of the leadership in the churches and even sort of politically was still with the African American community, but there was a big demographic that we realized we needed to engage and reach out to. So there's a language issue, but there's also a changing ethnicity issue to talk
Right.
about.
So our partner is the Watts Century Latino Organization. They are co-chairs with us. They've been a long-standing organization in the community, and they help with the language barrier. So everything that we put out has both English and Spanish translations, and so it's a welcoming environment for all cultures.
Yeah, and it's hard. Where Krista was in Hollywood, we have, Armenian, Thai. There's probably like literally 25 or 30 languages spoken in that particular area. So to even try and figure out how to do translation probably speaks to like the power of good graphics, that we would need to like present things in a way that people can engage without so much of this vocabulary that us planners learn to use. Okay, who's next? You, and then
So this
you,
is
and then
a quick question. I think it's probably related to some of the questions that have been asked, but it's come up on projects. I actually had someone bluntly ask me once in an interview, you're basically three white people sitting here asking us for a planning project in such an ethnically diverse area. Is there anything you guys did? It sounds like, Chris's organization was a good buffer just for that appearance, the front of it. Was there anything else that you guys did to try to address that? So it was, obviously, Jessica, Krista, Walker, you guys are all just Caucasian white people in a community like that, and that question, which was bluntly asked to us, I'm just curious if you guys did anything else to confront that question.
It's interesting. There's this optics. It's like, okay, here's these white people showing up,
right?
And you have to recognize how that comes across. But then, part of me feels like then it's the attitude that you bring in the room. You're on the authenticity, but I feel like diversity is a state of mind. And sometimes I get frustrated when there's like, we need to have everybody represented, but you could have everybody so staunchly in their sort of mindset of representing their ethnicity that they're not actually trying to, be diverse in perspective. But there's that, and then I think we've learned this other thing that's resonated for me is, the value of the local expert. I can't remember where this came up, but to really recognize that the people who know the neighborhood the best are the people who live there. And I think if you can get into that space and honor that, then you are in what Krista said, this listening mode, and you're respectful. And so far, we've been to 25 different places, with our lead ND assessment, some of which with Jessica, some hard places, Camden, New Jersey, and I think with that attitude, it helps. But, there is still that optics that you have to be conscious of, and maybe just have to work twice as hard to show that, you're well-intentioned, and, that's what I can come up with.
If I could just take a shot at that, though. To me, it's not really, even in this instance, about optics. There's no doubt that Grant Housing and now the Watts Century Latino Organization are in charge and sort of the chairs of the Watts ReImagined effort, with NRDC, Global Green, all the others in a supporting role.
Yeah.
So it's not optics. It's real. Like, we are not just some sort of front. I just want to make sure that's really clear.
Sort of the way it looks for us as Caucasians.
Yeah.
But I think what we know is that, I think Jessica referred to this, like, it doesn't work at all if you don't have a strong local partner that has, respect in that neighborhood. And that's, and I think we would never just show up and go, here we are, this is what you need. That's like patronizing and not ever going to be effective. And I think that's how we've largely worked. Thank you for asking a hard question. All right. You're on, and then Katie.
Have you guys worked in a more developed areas where you don't have the same problems as you have in Watts, and more diverse areas also where the split between people is bigger? My question comes more, I'm from Singapore and I'm working a lot in Thailand and these places also. And there you do tend to see a very big split between different classes within the same area. And if you've done that, what have you found as the best ways of actually making the project successful and engaging the communities there?
What do you think?
You
South
can-
side of Philadelphia?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Thank you.
talk about that one, Jessica.
No, I was going to give you to talk.
You were going to. I think the example we can think of is when we were in Philadelphia, and it's this sort of south of South Street neighborhood that was in this transitional moment. But I mean, I can tell this story, but I'm trying to how to answer your question. You know, a lot of where my thinking goes in what came up in this particular instance, the more developed area where there were these sort of blend of classes, was really that there was a concern that the people who were less affluent, you know, were going to be displaced. So it was fascinating to see this. Remember before we went there that we looked at this report and it's like, here's our problems: vacant lots, dumping, abandoned buildings, arson. And then we show up and it's like, our problem is gentrification and too rapid investment and displacement. And we're like, what happened here
in like
8
5 years?
Yeah.
It was like, you know, boggling, like, and problematic. And it had gone from a neighborhood where there was this actually interesting diversity of the corner store was like that was the lightning rod, that was the controversy, because those corner stores were sort of critical to the economy of that neighborhood before, but then in its sort of gentrified state.
Yeah, I think, Krista, just where we were in Cincinnati, like, you know.
I think it's really important when you're working in a neighborhood like that to make sure that the voice of the community who's being pushed out or potentially given less of a voice because money speaks a lot louder, making sure that they have a voice and shoring up their affordable housing and the things that support them living in their community ahead of everything else, just putting them in the forefront.
And I think part of it is to recognize how difficult it is to do authentic community engagement, because you can, you know, you have a community event and, you know, the people who opt in, they've already, like, there's a sort of a self-selecting group. And you might say, oh, 100 people came, it was a great meeting, but you may have missed a huge component. And we felt this when we were in Cincinnati, because there are all these well-intentioned, largely Caucasian, progressive people, some of which were affluent, some of them weren't that affluent, and they're at all these co-ops and worker-owned grocery stores, but we kept seeing, you know, black people and hearing, you know, music in cars that tells us that this community is there, but like we had almost no involvement in our outreach. And we had a lot of people come to our meetings, but we're like, who's this whole other community that's not showing up? And one of the outcomes of that site visit was for the people we were working with, you know, we're working to improve their neighborhood, so like we have to do something much more intentional and something different to get the whole neighborhood's perspective brought into this. And it's hard, and then I think it takes time to build up the trust. And then I think some of this events that are fun, and there's a transaction, a beneficial transaction, something fun for kids, you know, food, like it creates an opening, you know, to get this more diverse perspective. So there we go.
And just another question as a follow-up on that. Do you work on
I'm sorry, you only get one. We had a long talk in the taxi on the way to Greenbuild in New Orleans. I don't know if you remember. You get this back, but Katie gets to go first. We'll talk after. Sorry, I just want to get a few more, because I'm also at 0 up here on front. So,
yeah.
So I think I have a quick and easy question, which is, what were some of the funding sources for the planning and pre-development? I know yesterday, Chris, you talked about, in your session yesterday, you talked about the actual development sources, but how are you able to fund this actual planning effort? I mean, the pop-ups, the communications, the meetings.
So it hasn't been as easy as we thought. We've been courting the philanthropic community, but mostly it's been NRDC that has been able to fund almost everything. We have a small grant through California Water Foundation to do some of our green infrastructure work, but almost all of it is the planning work, and the consultants that are brought on have been paid for by NRDC. And that's like, you know, the small money, the bigger money, I guess you heard Chris talk about in terms of where he's going to find funding for the Park Gateway site.
Right, yeah. All right, you get a follow-on question?
So,
and where's my mic, Katie? All right, right, we're going to wrap up in no more than 5 minutes. I know we're over time, but if you guys are into this, you can tell we are, so we'll keep going.
I wanted to ask, were we on a panel together in Rochester?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I thought that was you.
Nice to see you.
The issue of community wealth building, my question revolves around your local experts, your folks in the community, and just kind of a follow the money approach to what activities are happening. Are you hiring, are people who are participating from the community also being paid?
I mean, for some of the planning activities and participation in Watts ReImagined?
Yes.
I mean, we wish we had lots more money to support the capacity building issue, but yeah, they're being paid, and we continue to seek funding in order to support our local partners.
What were some of the examples of some stipending or staffing from the community?
Mm-hmm. Chris?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, are you speaking of like what would naturally be a volunteer force? We were able to give stipends for lot preparation and for actual cleanup and things like that.
Okay, I'm told I have time for one more question. We're going to go back to the young lady from Los Angeles. So.
Hi, Melissa from Public Financial Management. I just wanted to know, I think the project is great and it's so exciting, but that street was long, and I was just wondering if there are more projects planned along that Street 103.
Yep.
Yes, there are several other projects. There's a center with a grocery store and others, so we've looked at how we can green it and make other kind of infrastructure changes to the entire area. So there are several others.
And I just want to make one point about Children's Institute. In the center of that Watts Main Street is the Children's Institute, which right now Frank Gehry has redesigned. So it's getting a lot of attention. It could be significant, especially if he actually pays attention to the pedestrian realm, but that's, hopefully.
All right, I'm told we have to stop. They need their mics back. Thanks to all of you for coming. Thank you, Chris, Jessica, Krista.
Good job.